Thank you, Vincent, for the kind introduction. And a very good morning to all of you. Chairman is not here right now, but all the distinguished guests, directors of FIM, and also the unit trust consultants in Malaysia. And I'm very, very honored to be here today to give this speech, to share with you a little bit about what we see, about the new realities in the investment environment going forward, and how this is going to impact the way we advise our clients. Just now when Vincent introduced me, he didn't really mention about my origination. I'm originally from Taiwan. When I met some of you earlier, I sort of mentioned that. And during the time when I was younger, and I'm not going to tell you when that was because I don't want you to guess my age, a lot of people I knew always had this dream about migrating to the US one day. Because at that time, the America to us in Taiwan, especially, a lot of people feel that it's like a paradise. And a lot of people living in the US, they tend to have big houses, they drive big cars, and they have great jobs, and they have very good, they make a lot of money. Right? Especially this kind of perception is further reinforced whenever there's a relative who comes to visit. And at that time when I was quite small, and I had a dog that was as tall as I was, and then I also had a robotic cat that was able to run around the house chasing after a ball. So all of those kind of things sort of like increased that kind of perception that the US was wonderful, was a wonderful place. And some people even went to the extent of, sending their pregnant wives to the US to give birth to their children. So the children will automatically become US citizens, which give them a legitimate reason to stay there or to apply for green cards or something. Right? So, and this kind of perception or this kind of belief at that time was not, and it's basically prompting us to rethink about the way we should invest. As I mentioned earlier, during the Great Moderation period, those trend-following, backward-looking kind of strategies tend to perform very well because everything was stable and predictable, and the trend was intact. But then going forward, we see that the norm that we were accustomed to in the past doesn't seem to be valid anymore. So looking back in the history to give us the guidance for the future is probably not the best way of doing things anymore. Actually, what I'm saying right now is nothing really new. As unit trust consultants, I'm sure you are very familiar with the phrase that, past performance is not an indication of future returns. It's a disclaimer that you have to put into whatever documentation that you provide to your clients. And this is probably as well-known a disclaimer as what you see on the cigarette packaging, which says smoking can cause cancer, right? So this kind of thing is really nothing new, and a lot of investment gurus have always been telling us the same thing. For example, Mark Faber, who is a very famous investment analyst and also who is the author of Gloom, Boom, and Doom report. He has a nickname of Dr. Doom. And he once commented about using this past statistical trend to predict the future projection. He says that it is fine when fundamentals remain constant, but fundamental is anything but constant. Then another very famous investor, Benjamin Graham, who is also called the father of value investing. And if you are familiar with Warren Buffett, he is actually the mentor of Warren Buffett. And in his book, The Intelligent Investor, he also talked about this relying on past performance. And he said that he believed that past performance is useful only if it's able to indicate the future. So going back to the analogy Chairman and Dr. was using earlier about driving, Relying on history to make future decisions is very often described as someone who's driving using just the rear view mirror. This is definitely not the best way to drive, and accidents will basically be waiting to happen. There are basically three issues here. Well, first of all, looking back in history is ignoring what the structural changes that's going to come your way. It's just like driving, looking in the rear view mirror. You will never know whether you are coming to a bend or whether you are coming to a cliff, or whether you should brake or whether you should turn. Let me just ask you those questions here. As you can see on the screen, there are 5 different asset classes as illustration. We have US large cap equity, Malaysian equities earlier. This has about 22% in bond asset classes and 78% in equity asset classes. Then at the end of 2008, with the market sell-off and the equity asset class and the global bond asset class basically at the undervalued kind of scenario, the long-term forward-looking projection is those asset classes will probably have better returns in the longer term. So at the end of 2008, those asset classes had higher allocation, in fact. So we had this time 36% in Malaysian equities, 22% in global bonds, and 42% in global equities.